Firebase, the power of Google in the palm of your hands, okay? Building a game today is a long and hard process that pits you against hundreds of new competitors every single day. I know, harsh. Whether you're having a hard time building a scalable backend, a crash is keeping you up at night, you can't quite figure out how to drive up your player engagement, or you're trying to tune your monetization to your players' preferences, well, Firebase makes it easy to leverage Google's expertise in backend infrastructure, analytics, and AI so you can focus on building a great mobile game. That's the most important thing, right? Okay, so this session is in English. So as I said before, if you want to see and check the translation in Portuguese, please access the link for the translation here on the channel, all right? So let's welcome, please, Patrick Martin. He's a developer relations engineer at Google. How are you, Patrick?
Pretty good. How's it going?
I'm fine, thanks. I loved your shirt.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Who
Yeah.
is Pepe Sylvia?
Stylish, stylish. So, Patrick, this screen is yours. Good luck.
All right. Awesome. Thanks. So, hi everybody. My name is Patrick Martin, and I'm a developer relations engineer on Google's Firebase. I'll be talking about, how Firebase helps you leverage Google's technology in your mobile game. So, as mentioned, there should be time for Q&A after this, but I will be on Discord all this week, and you can always reach out to me at Puxor on Twitter, which I check way more than is healthy. And there are also other Google folks here as well, so definitely take advantage of the opportunity at this festival. So let me start with what is Firebase. So Firebase's mission is to help game developers build and operate successful games that delight players. And I should say that the official mission says app developers and delight users, but we changed the wording around for game developers, and everyone on this team takes that to heart. And to tie this into my talk more accurately, there are some things that Google is very good at. Generally building large scalable cloud services and, machine learning things. And this is actually kind of different than what many game developers need to know. And Firebase can act as a bridge between these two worlds. So you just express what you need for your game and let Google take care of the rest. So Firebase is already used by millions of developers all over the world. And it's already battle tested at scale with some folks who might even be at this conference today. And to make it easy to use, Firebase has a number of client SDKs for use by app and game developers. There are platform-specific SDKs for iOS, Android, and the web. And for game-specific audiences, we have C++ and Unity SDKs that not only build on top of iOS and Android, but also bring beta desktop support to Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, which right now is just intended for use in the Unity editor or in local builds, since it takes a long time to deploy to device sometimes, but they're really coming along great. Now, I have less than 20 minutes to talk about 20 products, so I won't get to them all, and I'll go kind of fast. Apologies. But at a high level, Firebase has three major pillars. Build, which helps you experiment faster and scale reliably. Release and monitor, which makes sure your game is stable so folks can play. And engage, which lets you use your existing users to drive up the value of your game. I'm going to start with the build tools. And these are all easy enough to use that you can drop them in during the prototyping phase of game development. And they're robust and scalable enough that you can ship with them as well. And if you have a game engineering background like I do, this is where you'll spend much of your time. And I think what better way of illustrating this than showing you how Firebase was used for the Lotteria Google Doodle that lived on the Google homepage briefly. Now, Lotteria, if you're not familiar, is a game where each player has a set of cards dealt in front of them. Then one card is revealed at a time. If it matches one on your play area, you place a token on it and get 4 tokens in a row to win. And the Doodle version, as I said, is backed by Firebase. So I think it'll be fun to just walk through how we did matchmaking to give you a feel for what it's like to work with the build tools. So the very first thing you need to do for matchmaking is to add your user ID to a looking for games list, and then group users once you have enough for a game, right? So this means that I need a user ID, which Firebase Authentication provides. The Authentication SDK kind of smooths over all the complicated bits of maintaining user identity. And for the Doodle, we actually use what's called anonymous authentication, which is an instance-specific identifier for your user, meaning that when they uninstall the game or something, that user account kind of goes away forever. Um, but Auth supports a ton of different identity providers, including Game Center and Play Games, and even has an email and password solution that handles all the edge cases like email validation and password resets. And you can even add your own identity provider. A lot of games publishers like to do this. And once you sign in, the local user's identity is securely communicated to the rest of Firebase. So I really don't need to do much other like validation on the server. So let's look at the next bit. To register that I'm looking for a game, I'll add my player ID to Firebase's real-time database. This is a schemaless NoSQL database, so I can really easily just write into it from my client logic, making it great for prototyping, and it lessens the burden on your backend engineers. Even though I'm writing to it from my client, you can use security rules to ensure that folks stay well behaved, like locking folks out of games they're not in or preventing them from jumping the matchmaking queue. And even though I called it out as being great for prototyping, real-time database can scale into production and is used actively in games and apps around the world, including the Google Doodle. So I have this fun mock database to try to illustrate this all with nodes for a matchmaking queue, labeled queue, active games, and active players. So focusing on the queue real fast, my game client goes in and adds my user ID to it. But then I need to do the matchmaking itself, which means I do have to bounce into some server code with Cloud Functions. This is a way to run code in a trusted environment. They're small stateless functions, meaning that they have to use something like real-time database to persist data between runs, but it also means that they can scale up with usage. They really push you to develop code that can be made to handle more load by adding more server instances rather than more powerful servers. So scaling up and down can be fully automated. And in addition to helping you make the traditional like API endpoints, functions can be triggered from other Firebase products. So in the case of real-time database, when your database updates, a cloud function can automatically trigger to do some logic. So every time a user ID adds themselves to the matchmaking queue, a function runs automatically and checks to see if there are 4 players for a game. When there are, it creates a game node and adds all of the players to it. But then how do the players know that they're in a game? Since the function is effectively running in the background, without the game clients knowing, there's no way for like a return value to come back to say, hey, you're ready to go. But real-time database lets you listen for updates from your game client. So when I add myself to the matchmaking queue, I can also add a node to the player list with my player ID in it. When I'm put into a game, the matchmaking logic will write the game ID into my player node, which then lets my client load the actual game screen and the game goes. So just to wrap up this section real fast, using 3 of the 6 build tools in Firebase, I can give a user an identity, keep them in sync with the database, and run server logic in a trusted environment. But at no point did I have to manage the actual servers, do any database maintenance or upkeep, or even manually validate identity across the various services. And plenty of games, including Lotteria, are just fine like this. But if you ever do need more control, every Firebase project has an implicit backing Google Cloud project. So as your needs or team evolves, you're never stuck with the decisions you made early on, which is kind of what I mean by the power of Google in the palm of your hand, right? All the infrastructure bits you need, but only as much as you need to accomplish your goals with your current skill set. And again, there's way more here, but I need to move on. And besides, I think I'm putting the non-engineers to sleep. I'm not live, but I can kind of sense it, right? So next, I want to highlight release and monitor. Even if you don't use any build products, tools here will help you get a good night's rest before you hit the launch button. So on most of my games, release day looks very similar. I hit submit, have a brief celebration, then I start to refresh all the app stores as the game slowly propagates out. And then I'm obsessively checking user reviews, ratings, and mobile developer forums. And sometimes it's great. I've written games to the top of the App Store charts. But other times it's like total devastation. I once had an update for a game tank my rating from 5 stars to 1 star overnight. And this had all the terrible side effects. I crunched. It was super depressing. So I really want to know 2 things before I launch a game. Is the game stable, and is the game fun? For stability, the first thing I do is add Firebase Crashalytics to my game. It just sits there in the background waiting for the game to crash. It's a free service and should work automatically in most cases. If your game does experience an error, a call stack is automatically uploaded with any relevant data so you can gauge how stable your game is, which devices crash, and even how or where they crash. The goal here is to holistically determine if your game is stable. And if you do have an issue, you'll know how widespread it is and what is actually failing. So you know whether it's an all hands on deck problem or that once in a lifetime cosmic ray flipping a bit that we all get to claim once, right? The thing with Crashlytics, though, is that you have to run it on a device. If your game isn't out yet, that means you're only testing against phones you have in your device closet. A story I tell often is that we had a bug where a bunch of users were booting the game to a blank screen. We couldn't reproduce it internally, and it turned out that the reason why is that one phone manufacturer shipped different graphics chips in the US and Europe. So even though we had the same phone model that all the users were reporting the issue in, we couldn't actually see it. This is really bad. You kind of want to know about issues before your players do. So this is why Firebase Test Lab exists. You can either upload an APK and run a robo test against it, which just automatically measures things, or you can configure a game loop, which lets you run a predefined loop through your game on both real and virtual devices from all over the world and in all manner of performance categories. When a test completes, you get a detailed report with a video of the playthrough. And also, many game-breaking issues are not full-on crashes, so you get this really cool video with performance metrics overlaid. This is also helpful if you want to see if that cool victory particle effect is too slow on like old phones. Just upload it to Test Lab, select a low-end device, and see what happens. Of course, you'll eventually want to get real players in on the action, which is where Firebase App Distro comes in, a service that lets you upload an IPA or APK, which you then can share either internally or with testers. Does all the cool things like automated test groups, so you don't accidentally send your producer the build with a hand-drawn loading bar, which is the thing I did once. And it also creates and manages invite links. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that both App Distro and Test Lab can be fully automated. So you can run tests as an automatic validation hook, or automatically send your weekly build to QA testers every Friday or something. So you build a game, it's stable, your testers are happy, you have an automated build pipeline. It's time to slap a bow on it and kick it out the door, right? This is where I'd say you're wrong with modern game development. You want to actively engage a game and its community, since your players and their market are always shifting. You need to constantly tweak your gameplay and your monetization strategy to remain relevant and competitive. So let's operate a game. Remember how I mentioned that you want to know if a game is good? It's one thing to get a bunch of testers to fill out a survey, which will always be positive if you lured them in with pizza, and another to see folks enjoying your game at scale. So I always start out any project by adding analytics. At the very least, I want to see retention. If I have a pile of prototypes, but one of them still has players a week later, that's the one that I should build out, even if it's among my coworkers. And you can also use analytics to classify your players into different cohorts and customize your game accordingly. With AdMob integration, you can automatically get revenue reports. So you can compare the average revenue per user against your user acquisition costs. And there are customized reports for game-specific use cases. But once you know how your players behave, you can start iterating towards a better game. And I don't have to tell folks here about how long it takes to go from a change in code to a rollout to your players, especially with the lengthy review times in most app stores. You can use Firebase Remote Config to tweak your game between full releases in both Unity and C++. You can't really ship code like this, but I've definitely done things like tweak timers and the scoring for many games to see what happens to my player engagement. You can use this to roll out changes to a consistent random slice of your players, or to categories of those players. So you can make the game harder for players who beat player level 10 with like a score that's over 9,000. They definitely need a bit more of a challenge. And of course, you can use this to balance your revenue. Finding the right ad frequency for each segment of players can mean life or death for small studios. And it makes sense to combine these two products to run scientific tests, which is exactly what A/B testing does. By defining various cohorts of your players, you can run short or long-term tests measuring the results on key metrics like retention or revenue. You'll be able to compare key analytics between your test configurations, so you're not spending all your time trying to figure out how to query your analytics data. If you use remote config all the way through, you can easily just promote an experiment to the default configuration when you decide it's working out. And there's a great study here about how Pomelo Games use this very strategy to drive up their revenue without sacrificing user retention. Just remember that your game and your players are unique. You need to figure out what works for you. You have to keep experimenting because what works for you will change over time. But because we can categorize players, it's useful to customize your game accordingly. But with just analytics, you can only be retroactive. Predictions, on the other hand, lets you use your own analytics data to classify your users and predict how they'll behave in the future. So you can customize a game to how each player might behave rather than just how they've behaved so far, including figuring out if someone is likely to spend money or is getting ready to stop playing your game. Once you have analytics events marked as conversion events, predictions will automatically train up an AI model for your player base. You can then use this to create audiences that you target with remote config. As an example, Rockbite used this technique to predict if users would spend money and reordered their in-game store accordingly, putting either in-app purchases or incentivized ads at the top of the store according to predicted player behavior, driving up revenue. There's a huge tool set here, everything you need to keep your game healthy and your players happy. I want to hammer home that this isn't all of Firebase. You can build the connected features the game needs today, ensure your game is stable, and engage your players with the goal of getting all the heavy lifting on the back end out of the way so you can just focus on what matters most to a game developer, finding the fun. All right. And that's, yeah, I believe we have a Q&A section. Again, apologies, I went fast, but there's a lot.
Don't worry, you were great. I mean, this content is so good. We do have some questions. In these Firebase services, which are charged and which are free? Does this platform have language variation? Is it possible to build text-based games only with Firebase?
So we do have a pricing page if you search for Firebase Pricing, which will tell you which are free and which cost some money. A lot of what I covered has free tiers. I think Cloud Functions is the only one that might require a credit card. And even with Test Lab, you get 10 virtual and 5 physical devices for free per day. And then what were the other questions? I believe language, right?
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Patrick, do you have something else to add?
Not offhand. Yeah, if I've answered everything, awesome. That means I either went too fast and no one understood me, or I answered every question out there, right?
Yeah, well, actually, we had this question, which was basically 3 in 1, you know?
Yeah.
So I really want to thank you for your time and your explanation. This session was really great. Thank you very much. And you, watching us, please make sure that you share Big Festival with your friends, with your family, with everyone, okay? So use the link bigfestival.com.br, all right? Okay, I'll be right back in our next session in a few minutes, okay?
Big Festival 2021, the biggest games festival in Latin America.